She broke up with me the night before the biggest game of my life. Not in person, not with a phone call. She sent me a text at 9:47 p.m. while I was in the hotel room doing my pre-game routine, the same routine I had done before every game for 4 years. Music, stretching, 15 minutes of visualization, lights out by 11. I had my headphones in when the message came through. I almost did not check it. I checked it. 6 words. Tyler, I can't do this anymore. That was all. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a long time. The music was still playing in my headphones. I did not hear it. I stared at those 6 words on a screen that had my entire life in it. 3 years of messages, 3 years of calls, 3 years of the person I thought I was going to build everything with. And I tried to understand what I was reading. I could not understand it. So I did what I always did when I could not understand something. I put it away. I finished my routine. I turned the lights out at 11. I played the worst game of my life the next day. My name is Tyler. I am 32 years old. I am a federal prosecutor for the Western District of Texas, based in Austin, and I want to tell you something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am not someone who carries things. I am not someone who replays old games or reopens old wounds or lies awake reconstructing the moments that changed the direction of my life. I am someone who looks forward. It is, my colleagues would tell you, both my greatest professional asset and the thing that makes me the most difficult person they have ever prepared a case with. I tell you this because what happened 10 years ago is not a wound I have been tending. It is a fact I filed away. And the reason I am telling you about it now is because 6 weeks ago, it walked into my office wearing a blue dress and a cover story that took me approximately 4 minutes to see through. But I am getting ahead of myself. I grew up in San Antonio. I was the kind of kid who needed something to pour himself into, and basketball was that thing from the age of 9. By the time I was 18, I was being recruited by programs across the state. I chose UT Austin on a full scholarship in the fall of 2011. I was a point guard. I was fast, I was methodical, and I had what my college coach called, in his particular way of describing things, an unreasonable memory for what other people were about to do before they did it. I met Morgan in the spring of my freshman year at a study session in the PCL library that I had no business attending since I was not in the class. A friend had dragged me along. Morgan was at the table across from me, highlighter in hand, and she looked up from her textbook and said, "You are absolutely not in this class." And I said, "No, but I am absolutely going to need your notes." And she laughed, and that was it. 3 years. From that Tuesday afternoon in the library to the night before the conference championship. 3 years. She was pre-law. She was sharp and funny, and she pushed back on everything I said that was not worth saying, which was more than I would like to admit. She came to every home game and most of the away ones. She was in the stands the night I scored 31 points against Kansas in December of my junior year, and she met me outside the locker room afterward and did not say anything about the game at all, just handed me a coffee and said, "You look like you need this more than you need anyone telling you how good you were." I loved her for 4 different reasons in that single moment. I loved her the way you love someone when you are 21 and you have not yet learned how expensive that kind of love can be. My teammate Chad was a shooting guard from Dallas, talented, ambitious, and constitutionally incapable of being in a room with attention going to someone else. I noticed it early. Coaches notice it eventually. Scouts notice it always. By our junior year, it had become something more specific, a pattern of small undermining that was easy to dismiss individually and impossible to ignore collectively. A comment here, a statistic reframed there. The particular habit of describing my performances to scouts and reporters in ways that were technically accurate and fundamentally misleading. I did not say anything. I played my game. I let the numbers speak. By the night before the championship game, the numbers had spoken clearly enough that a scout from a professional organization had already made initial contact with my agent. a fact I had told no one except my mother and Morgan. I told Morgan in early February. She had been quieter than usual in the weeks before that conversation, something I had noticed and attributed to her law school application process, which was genuinely stressful. When I told her about the scout contact, she smiled and said, "That's incredible, Tyler," and hugged me. And that night she went quiet again in a way I did not fully process until much later. The text came on a Thursday night in March. 6 words. 2 hours after I received it, one of my teammates texted me asking if I was okay and mentioned, without understanding what he was saying, that he had just seen Morgan at a party off campus with Chad. I stared at that message for a long time too. Then I put it away. I finished my routine. I turned the lights out at 11. The game the next day was not something I am going to describe in detail. I will tell you that we lost by 9 points and that I had 11 turnovers. 11. A number that still exists in a box score that anyone can find. And that I stood in the locker room afterward while my coach said the right things and my teammates said the right things, and I nodded at all of it and felt nothing, because I had put everything in a box, and the box was sealed, and I did not have the capacity to feel anything except the specific physical exhaustion of a body that performed for 40 minutes on no sleep and a broken engine. I did not go to the party. I did not call Morgan. I did not confront Chad. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I made a decision that I want to describe carefully, because it is the decision that made everything else possible. I decided not to be destroyed by it. Not because I was not hurt. I was hurt in a way that took a long time to understand the full shape of, the way some structural damage does not reveal itself until the next heavy load. But I understood, sitting on that bed, that the way I responded to the next 12 months was going to determine the next 12 years. And I was not going to let Morgan's 6 words and Chad's particular brand of ambition write the next chapter of my life. I withdrew from the draft process. Not because of what happened, I want to be clear about that, but because the scout contact had been preliminary, and the professional path was uncertain, and I had already been accepted to the UT School of Law for the following fall. The decision was already made before the championship game. What happened that Thursday night did not make it. It just made the timeline feel different. I started law school in August of 2014. I graduated 3rd in my class in 2017. I clerked for a federal judge in the Western District. I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in Austin in 2019 as an assistant federal prosecutor. In 2022, I was promoted to lead prosecutor on financial crimes. Chad played 2 seasons of professional basketball in a minor league before a knee injury ended his career at 26. He transitioned into sports management and opened a sports agency in Austin in 2020. By 2022, the agency was doing well. By 2023, my office had flagged it. The financial patterns were not subtle once you knew what to look for. Athlete contract fees running through shell corporations. Cash movements that did not match the agency's reported client roster. A real estate investment arm that had acquired 4 properties in 18 months with no documented financing source. The kind of architecture that looks like success from the outside and looks like money laundering from 6 feet inside it. We opened a formal investigation in January of last year. Chad's agency was the primary target. By March, we had enough to begin building the indictment. By April, my investigative team had mapped every significant relationship in Chad's professional network. That is when Morgan's name appeared. She had been in Chad's life since college. They had dated briefly, then separated, then maintained what the financial records suggested was something more than a friendship. Her name on a lease for one of the agency's properties, a joint bank account that had received 3 wire transfers in 2 years from a corporation registered in Delaware, a pattern of communication with Chad that my team characterized, in the language of federal investigation, as consistent with knowing participation. I looked at Morgan's name in that report for a long time. Then I told my team to continue building the case and said nothing else. 6 weeks later, my assistant told me that a woman named Morgan had called requesting a meeting with me specifically. She said she had information relevant to a federal matter and wanted to discuss cooperation options. I told my assistant to schedule the meeting for the following Tuesday. Of course, it was a Tuesday. She walked in wearing a blue dress and a practiced expression of someone who was frightened but trying not to show it. She was 32 years old. She looked like herself and like someone who had made a series of decisions she had not fully accounted for. She sat across from my desk and she told me that her brother had become inadvertently entangled in a federal investigation and that she was hoping I could help him navigate a cooperation arrangement. I listened to the entire thing without interrupting. Then I said, "Morgan, your brother has not been contacted by this office. He is not a person of interest in any active investigation I am aware of. But I think you already know that." She went very still. I said, "I think you came here because your name is in our financial records in connection with Chad's agency, and you wanted to understand how much we know before you decided what to do next." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Tyler. Just my name. The same way Kayla had said Marcus. The way people say your name when they have run out of everything else." I said, "I know. I also need you to understand something. What you do in the next 10 minutes determines what happens to you in the next 10 years. So I need you to be very careful about what you say to me right now." I opened the folder on my desk. I turned it toward her. It was a federal cooperation agreement, not for her brother, for her. I said, "You have two options. You sign this and you cooperate fully with this investigation and we discuss consideration for your role. Or you walk out of this office and you receive a target letter within 30 days. I need you to understand that both of those outcomes are already prepared, and this conversation does not change which one arrives. It only changes which one you choose." She looked at the agreement for a long time. Then she looked up at me, and she said something I did not expect. She said, "I broke up with you that night because I was scared." I said nothing. She said, "I overheard Chad talking to another player 2 weeks before the championship. He said a scout had already contacted your agent. He said if you went pro, you were going to be gone, and I was going to be left behind in Austin, finishing a law degree while you were in a different city, living a different life. I broke up with you because I was afraid of being left, not because of Chad. Chad was just... he was there. He was certain. He was not going anywhere, and I thought that was what I needed." I looked at her across my desk for a long moment. I said, "And was it? What you needed?" She did not answer that. I said, "Sign the agreement, Morgan." She signed it. Chad's arrest happened on a Saturday morning in April at the annual Austin Sports Community Charity Basketball Classic, an event Chad had organized and funded and put his name on the banner of. Cameras from 3 local news stations present, 200 attendees including current and former professional athletes, coaches, sponsors, and members of the Austin business community who had invested in his agency. The warrant had been authorized by my office 48 hours before. I was not there in person. Federal prosecutors do not attend arrests. But I was in my office when my lead investigator called me at 10:15 that morning and said, "It's done." I said, "Thank you." I hung up. I sat at my desk for a moment. Outside my office window, Austin was doing what Austin does on a Saturday morning in April. Warm and green, and entirely indifferent to the particular justice being administered in one corner of it. I got up and made myself a coffee. I stood at the window and drank it. Morgan cooperated fully. Her testimony was precise and detailed and consistent across 4 separate sessions with my team. Her attorney negotiated a deferred prosecution agreement conditional on her complete cooperation and her divestment from every asset connected to the agency. She is not going to prison. She is going to spend the next several years rebuilding something from a much smaller foundation than the one she thought she had. Chad's trial is scheduled for the fall. I will not be in the courtroom for it. I have recused myself from the trial phase, given my history with the defendant, which is standard practice, and which I decided before anyone asked me to. Another prosecutor in my office will handle it. The case is strong. The documentation is thorough. The outcome is, my colleagues tell me, not in serious doubt. Update. Morgan's attorney contacted my office 3 weeks ago to communicate, through proper channels, that Morgan wanted me to know something. Not as part of the legal proceedings, just something she wanted me to know.
The scout from 10 years ago. The professional organization that had made initial contact with my agent the winter before the championship. She found out 2 years after we broke up, from a mutual friend who had been present for the original conversation, that the contact had been more serious than preliminary, that the organization had intended to continue the process after the season ended, that the scholarship and the application and the decision I described as already made before that Thursday night was not as decided as I had presented it to be. I had been considering going pro, genuinely considering it, and if I had gone, I would likely have asked her to come with me. She did not know that. She made her decision on incomplete information and the wrong advice from the wrong person, and it cost her 10 years of her life, built around someone who turned out to be exactly what my investigation needed him to be. I thought about that for a long time. I do not have a clean resolution to offer you about what it means. I just have the truth of it, which is that she made her choice, and I made mine, and the two choices intersected in a conference room on a Tuesday 10 years later in a way that neither of us could have constructed if we had tried. I still have the pre-game routine: music, stretching, 15 minutes of visualization, lights out by 11. I use it before every major trial. It has never failed me the way it failed me that Friday morning in March, which I have come to understand was not a failure of the routine. It was a failure of the information I went to bed with. I do not go to bed with incomplete information anymore. She broke up with me the night before the biggest game of my life. 10 years later, she sat across from my desk, and I gave her the only thing I had the power to give her: a choice. The kind of real, clear, fully informed choice she did not give me on that Thursday night. I think that is the closest thing to justice that this particular story was ever going to produce, and I will take it.